This was the first, for the undergraduates anyway, this was the first time they were away from home, away from Chicago, away from neighborhoods where they were the majority. So I think that the politicization took place on campus for most of these undergraduate students. They were not used to this white environment. They were not used to the treatment they sometimes encountered, to being invisible in many of their classes where they were always one or two, not the majority. So I think it was a very shocking experience, culture shock, right, for a lot of them. And that was what was wonderful about La Casa Cultural Latina, that it was that space where people could come together.
Part of the Cultural Center's objective también at that time was to make sure that we kept the students aware of what was going on in our communities as far as trying to get access to public office, exercise our rights to vote. And in that regard, we were trying to educate, give the students an orientation of participation in their community, that it wasn't just getting a degree and leaving an institution like U of I and going out and looking at the bottom line, which is making a lot of money.
I'd say there were mostly Mexican American and Puerto Rican students, but there were also Cuban and Central American students, South American students, and they were activists. There were still a lot of things that higher education had to provide for the success of Latino students, such as having a critical mass of Latino students at the university at the undergraduate level and graduate level, and also hiring of Latino faculty and administrators that reflected the population of students there.
Students from La Colectiva served as the catalyst to get La Casa going. I know they don't do this anymore because maybe it's because of the way both the black and the Latino students functioned back in the late 60s and early 70s. But it was very common during my undergraduate years for, say, the Latino students in Northern to go to the student services and say, we need a driver and a bus because we need to go to U of I as part of an organization, and we would say it's going to be for a conference on A, B, C, and D, and we would get 40 students on a bus and come down here and then march to your quad with the other students from here to create a little pressure on the administration to come around and see what we wanted to do.
Another issue was a lot of them were apolitical, right? So then there was a conflict between the people who thought La Casa should be the party center and a social center because they didn't have that anywhere else on campus, and they felt that that was the primary, should be the primary function of La Casa. And then there were others of us who felt that it was about politicization, about organizing, about you know, getting more resources, about getting courses, about bringing in speakers, getting films. So that was always a tension, and it was hard to negotiate that because both are necessary. And I remember at that time I was really dogmatic, and I thought that parties were foolish, a waste of time. I don't feel like that anymore. But, you know, I was really like militant, and this is what we need to do, and we got to be serious, and why do you want to have parties? And there were, you know, so people thought I was nuts. And, you know, then there were the people who all they wanted to do was party. So, you know, we needed to find that happy medium of having a good time and having social events and just dances and all that, but also, you know, organizing around the issues.
We created the first Latino graduation ceremony, and I understand that to this day it takes place 30 years later, almost 30 years later. And the students were quite excited about planning that event because it was acknowledging their classmates that were graduating. And for the graduates, it was a time to bring their families and to celebrate.
We started with 12 students. And then I always, when I go to the Latino congratulatory ceremony, I am amazed. I feel that I'm in another university, and then saying, where did all the students came from?
Sashes were made to reflect the cultures that were represented in our group, primarily Puerto Rican students and the Mexican Americans. And so the respective red, white, and green and red, white, and blue sashes were made that they wore of their graduation gowns. That perhaps was a very exciting time.
My biggest emotions nowadays is to see this 80, 100, and more than 100. Then from 12 to that, I see that it's a great accomplishment for La Casa Cultural Latina to have that many students wanting to be part of it, wanting to be part of the legacy of the Latinos, being proud of their culture.